Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good day and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. My name is Tabak. Excuse me. I will moderate today's discussion. Sorry for that cough at the start here. Our topic today is, what does religious tolerance mean today? And we want to think about some of the challenges to this idea of religious tolerance that we might be facing today. To help us in this discussion, we have three guests with us today. On my left here, I have Imam Hassan Selim, who represents Muslims here in Cedar Rapids. Chuck Hurley is with the family leader and comes to us today from Des Moines. And Rabbi Todd Thalblum is with Temple Judah here in Cedar Rapids. So why don't you say just a few words of introduction for yourself. I've given your name, but maybe a little bit more about your involvement in the community. One of the things we're trying to do in this discussion is not only introduce our audience to an important topic, but also to some interesting and engaged members of our community. So maybe a few words about yourself.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. I work as the Imam at the Islamic Center of Cedar Rapids, so I serve the Muslim community in Cedar Rapids and surrounding areas, providing religious, spiritual, and educational services for the Muslim community.
Okay, thank you very much. And the family leader and...
Sure. Thanks for having me over from Des Moines.
Yeah.
We do represent people all throughout Iowa. And I have some background in religious liberty litigation. I'm an attorney. Did my third year paper on the First Amendment religion clauses. Have handled 60 or 65 cases or controversies regarding First Amendment issues. And have been to probably 30 or 40 days of conferences in the last 15 years trying to stay up on things. So not the leading expert, but very interested.
Okay.
And I'm Rabbi Todd Thalblum, as you said. Most people call me Rabbi Todd.
Okay.
I've been at Temple Judah now for 10 years, going on 11. Besides all of my duties at the temple, which include similar duties to what Hassan does, including teaching and leading services and spiritual guidance, I've been very involved in the Interreligious Council of Linn County here the whole time that I've been up here. Been on the board, been a past president. Hassan, who didn't mention, is the current president of the Interreligious Council. So I've tried to stay very involved in the larger community here in Cedar Rapids as well while I've been here.
So I'd like to begin with a little story or a little anecdote and see how you might respond to this. I work, as you probably do, with some people who are vegetarians. And some are vegetarians for religious reasons. And some are vegetarians for moral reasons that don't have a foundation in a religious philosophy. They just believe that it's wrong to slaughter animals for human consumption. And some are vegetarians because their reading of the medical or scientific literature tells them this is a more healthy diet. I don't see any evidence that anyone has any trouble with these kinds of differences. We all get along this way. And we respect the fact that people come to that kind of issue from many different directions and draw different conclusions. No problem. My sense is today, though, that there are other questions, and in particular now about marriage and homosexuality, that have divided people in a different way, where it's much harder for people to sit and talk with one another and respect that they might come to different opinions, sometimes for religious reasons, sometimes for non-religious reasons. And so I proposed this topic to our producers when I read of several cases in the news of people who lost business or professional opportunities because of their stance on this kind of issue. One was a man named Brendan Ike. He's the inventor of the JavaScript programming language, and he was the leader of an organization called the Mozilla Foundation that produces software, including the Firefox browser. He donated $1,000 to a referendum campaign in California when Californians were debating the definition of marriage. People found out about this. The donation was a matter of public record and pressed him to resign, and he lost that position. In another case, I'm a computer scientist, so these are the ones that come to my attention maybe first. more recently, this year, there was a man who offered to speak at a conference about web design and graphic design and marketing online and so on. And his professional affiliation was with the church with a large congregation who again had taken a conservative stance on this one issue. And a sponsor of the conference said, "We're withdrawing if you leave this person on the program." So this, that's where we start. I don't know what the question is, but I'm wondering if there's some shared concern. Maybe make that contrast between people who might differ on dietary preferences, and it's no big deal. I can't imagine anybody losing a job because he takes one view or another on vegetarianism. But I can't imagine people losing opportunities because of the intense emotions over some of these other moral or religious questions. What do you have to say?
I think, from my perspective, I see that across the spectrum, whether it's religion, sexuality, politics, or otherwise, we are, as a society in general, we are kind of going towards a more of a tribalism culture, or a culture of tribalism. And so people have certain ideas, they have certain convictions or beliefs or thoughts. They find people who are like-minded, and they try to create their own tribe where they feel comfortable, they feel safe. And more, because of different rhetoric that we hear, not just from politicians, but from artists, from religious leaders, just from people, as I said, across the spectrum in any group, kind of leading us farther and pushing us farther and farther as a society to be more divided. And that's a reality that we, whether religious leaders or community civil leaders, we need to take seriously, because we are now seeing we are seeing the sad results and consequences of such culture of tribalism already happening. If we don't move now, if we don't take actions now, I think things, and I don't like to be to look at the future with a dark glasses or anything, but the future might be holding a lot worse situations than what we are experiencing now, similar to what you have mentioned already.
Rabbi Todd?
Well, I think there's a difference between the two kinds of examples that you presented.
Okay.
For one thing, vegetarianism, or people who choose to be either vegans or vegetarians, are not a group that is historically persecuted against in our society in general. So to start there, as opposed to some of these other groups who are really persecuted against and should have equal protections under the law in many instances here in the United States, and that's a basis where we need to consider some of the differences here. And even with something like vegetarian or veganism, we see a huge push in our society to be more inclusive, more accepting, to offer more options at restaurants. Everywhere we go, you invite somebody to dinner, you ask them what their dietary restrictions are nowadays. We didn't used to do that anymore.
Sure.
What it is can we feed you? And I think the difference with this other group, especially with the guy who was ultimately fired because he gave money to the referendum, which was actually trying to deny rights to an entire group of people that really should be protected, the LGBT community in our society. We are built on a country that wants to strive for equality in every way. We have built into our laws the Americans with Disabilities Act, that we have to be inclusive and offer opportunities for everybody, and we can't then be so intolerant of certain situations that we then demonize other groups of people. And I think that was part of what was happening here. When you're intolerant to a minority group of people in America, where we want to be striving for equality, people are going to rise up and say we want to be treating people more equally. And I think that's one of the fights that we're getting to here in today's society. How do we treat everybody equally while at the same time respecting your right maybe to think something differently, which is totally fair. But your right to think something differently can't impinge on my civil rights to express myself. And that's where we run into problems. As long as you're just expressing your religious identity for your own self or your own group of people, that's not a problem. But when your religious identity tries to encroach upon mine and tell me how I have to behave or how I should believe in a country that's protecting my personal freedoms, then we have a real problem. And I think that was the problem with the example that you were showing.
Okay. Chuck, you mentioned the First Amendment, but I'm interested today in not just what the law says or compels us to do, but also the kind of courtesies we want to offer even in the absence of any legal compulsion, how we're going to get along.
Sure, you know, tolerance, I think, should be a two-way street. People will have strong disagreements on things of profound importance, and in a pluralistic society, we really need to do a good job of protecting everyone's right of conscience. And so there are very strong feelings around Prop 8 and so forth, and yet to punish someone, you know, fairly significantly, losing a job, smacks of intolerance. And so I think really, you know, when you have an issue on the ballot and there's strong wills on both sides and it was a close vote and it's America, you know, don't do these harsh punishments. You know, have your debate, but don't smack people.
So another issue I want to put before you was, I think it was just this year, there was a candidate for a position on the federal court, and some of the senators at the confirmation hearing asked this nominee about his membership in the Knights of Columbus. The Knights of Columbus is a Catholic fraternal organization. And they pressed this candidate, did you know that the Knights of Columbus is opposed to abortion? Well, of course, the whole Catholic Church is opposed to abortion. And it seemed to suggest that while the Constitution bars any religious test for office, that these senators were saying you could be Catholic, you just can't be too Catholic. Am I reading that one unfairly here? Who wants to push back on that a little bit?
I think it's a delicate question. If I remember correctly, we had similar questions around John Kennedy's presidency. Was he too Catholic to be president for the United States in some way? And I think it was a fair question, how are you going to be a representative of the entirety of the country or a vast, diverse group of people based on your, you know, given that you're raised in a religion that also professes a certain or particular point of view, right? Can you balance that point of view with what the needs of the community that you're supposed to be serving? I think that's a fair question. It's not to say that you can be too Catholic or too religious in some way, but you're being elected by the population, so you have to at least be able to answer the question, how are you going to serve the entirety of the population and not just one limited interest group? And as long as that's as far as the question goes, I think that's a fair question. I think you're right. You can't say there shouldn't be you can't be any certain religion and then not be able to be a representative in this country. That goes against everything we stand for. We should have the right to freedom of religion. But I think it's a fair question when you're electing somebody to office, how are you going to be able to support my interests as well as your own? You're not just acting for yourself.
Sure, you know, the voter has a choice there, and there should not be compulsion or threats or anything of that sort. And yet, it's just plain un-American for governments, particularly, to punish someone for their faith. I mean, governments really are designed to protect rights rather than punish rights of conscience, particularly. So I think we've really got to be careful with the tribalism that wants to punish. I mean, we're so competitive, the Hawkeyes, the Cyclones. We want to crush the opponent. No. We're supposed to love our neighbor, even if we disagree with them. Difficult? Yes. Vital? Absolutely yes.
I want to take it from where you say, even if we disagree with them, and here I put my hands on another problem, which is our inability to have the conversations that we disagree, and the lack of civility that we are like witnessing around in different arenas. And I think that this is something we have to press, that we need to restore this civility, our ability to have a conversation, to sit down around the table and say, we agree to disagree, here are my reasons. And I think that even starts from childhood, you know, not to go too far, but teaching our children to express their ideas and thoughts in a way that does not really violate their, you know, peers and their, you know, classmates, their friends' rights to be different from them. So it really is it's a really hard issue to tackle, but it's at the same time, we know where the issue is: lack of civility, lack of our inability to have conversations and say, here's what we think, here's what we believe. We are agreeing that we are different from each other.
Yeah.
We have our own interests and we will go after them, but let us have the conversation, you know,
Amen.
and let us be clear about what we think and what we believe.
Yeah.
So just to add to
Somewhere
this.
we got to the idea in the last few years that compromise was losing. As opposed, you know, and you either had to be staunch in your opinion and your belief and whatever it was, and if you gave any ground, you were already losing. But that's not our democratic way in the first place. The whole point is to be able to have the conversation about what the needs of the people are and come to some compromise so that everybody's needs are met to the best ability that we can do that. And we've lost that conversation whatsoever because because we don't seem to be getting anywhere either, because people are too tired of even trying to struggle with it, and it's very sad.
And it's almost like, maybe it's, you know, it's a different analogy, but it's almost like a marriage. You know, if we think about compromising as losing, then you know, marriages will not last very long. And us being partners in a society, partners in a country, you know, fellow citizens of each other's. If we look at compromising as losing, then we are saying this partnership in society will not work anymore, and then we resort to tribalism.
Where do you see, I've suggested some of my concerns, where do you see challenges to religious tolerance? To the extent that you see intolerance in our society, where are you seeing that? Where do you think we should be most concerned?
Well, I'll touch a hot one. I'll touch a third rail issue. We've seen U.S. Supreme Court decisions recently about a baker who politely turned down baking a cake for a same-sex wedding. And that really got hot on both sides. Unfortunately, there was not as much dialogue, I think, as there should have been. But, you know, my view is that all Americans should be able to live and work according to the dictates of their conscience without fear of unjust government punishment. And when there's a baker literally right down the street, and there's a dozen bakers within, you know, a couple miles that will bake the cake, rather than punishing and fining and making an example and smacking that baker, why can't we respect his conscience and allow
And if that baker had turned away an interfaith couple for his same religious conscience, would you feel the same way? Because that's the fight we had in the 60s about sitting at the counter. If you're going to open a public store where you are serving the public good, then you have to serve the public that comes in. You can't turn people away. If they're, you know, shirt, shoes, whatever, you have to give service to the people coming into your store. You can't discriminate against them. And turning away a homosexual couple for no other reason than your religion is discriminating against them, because they just as easily said, my religion wouldn't allow me to serve this interfaith, interracial couple. Thank you. I was missing my word. But if it had been an interracial couple and they had tried to deny them service, it would have been just as huge an issue. It would have been just as illegal, or should have been.
Well, the problem is when big government forces you to violate your conscience. That's a real serious problem.
But there's certain moral issues that the government has the right to say, your conscience shouldn't be thinking this. You can't discriminate against African Americans and say, I'm not going to serve you in my store. That's discrimination. If you turn it against a homosexual couple, it's discrimination. If you're going to serve everybody else that comes around, if you don't want to do that, then don't open a public store. Only bake your art for the people that you want to bake it for. But if you want to make money at it in our country, then you have to serve the public.
Well, there's room in the public square for people of goodwill of all different faiths. And you have to admit Jack was a man of great will.
But you
Baronel
can't be
Stutzman,
so intolerant that you're discriminating against a person
but
here.
You can't be so intolerant that they politely turn down a business.
They shouldn't have that right.
they're-
That was the point. Polite or not, I don't care how polite it was.
Well, it
if it had
matters
been
how
a black
polite.
and white couple that walked into their store and he turned them away,
think-
I don't care how polite he was being, he would have been racist.
It matters how polite they are. That was what the
It
U.S.
doesn't
Supreme
totally
If
matter.
I may
Let's
add
That's what
one
the
of
U.S.
All right,
Supreme
but
Court
I disagree.
decision
Let's hear from
turned on.
Imam Selim.
If I may add that one of the, I'm myself an immigrant, and so I think one of the very attractive things about the United States for me, coming from a different society, is the existence of, first of all, the power of the Constitution and also the power of the Supreme Court and the power of our ability as people to come together and like participate, like this debate that I'm just witnessing is something that is amazing that we all as Americans need to participate in this discussion and this conversation of like creating the tolerance that we are all seeking. You know, tolerance towards people of different religions, people of different, sexual orientations, people of different culture backgrounds. Because as soon as we open the door and say, you know, it's okay to exclude one group, then why is it not okay to exclude another group, and then a third group, and then a fourth group,
Right.
and then again, I go back to my very first point. The culture of tribalism, the strongest tribe is going to overpower, and then I think we are looking at a very ugly picture here. So we all need to participate in the conversation. We all need to have, and I even almost like don't like the word tolerance, because it suggests that someone is just kind of giving up or allowing another party to, or another person or another group to, you can be here because I want you to be here, but at a certain time I might not really like that because the demographic is changing. My position is kind of threatened, and now I'm not tolerating you anymore. I think it's partnership, and that takes us away from tolerance into partnership, appreciation of one another. And this is why we're having, I think, this conversation.
I like that. I was thinking the same thing about the word tolerance, and the word I kept coming up with was respect.
Respect.
That if we had respect and showed respect for one another and treated each other with respect as the starting point, it would open the conversation or make the conversation easier.
My point was the U.S. Supreme Court found that the baker was not treated with respect. He was vilified. He was compared to,
After the fact, though, not when the people walked in there and asked for the cake and then he turned them down. I mean, maybe he wasn't treated with respect after the fact, after it came out that he had discriminated against this couple in the first place. But was he as respectful as he was in turning them down? Weren't they respectful in the way they asked for the cake and came into the store and put in their order in the first place? That's the respect that you should be talking about.
Well, and as you well know, the law says, based on sexual orientation, the case was determined on a ceremony that he was asked to promote, and that's
he
a
was
huge,
asked to make a cake for,
it's a huge
not
difference.
to promote. I think. Well,
It's a
I'm not
huge
going to. You're right. The law. You have the
Legally.
law. That's
Yeah.
the way it was. That's the way it was determined.
Sure.
I know. I still disagree with the decision because I think it was. It's about discrimination and not about politeness here. But that's another issue.
Let me ask you about another question. You mentioned this 50 years ago with the election of John Kennedy. The question then, or the charge, the form that intolerance took, was a suggestion that a Catholic had dual allegiances. And do we still see some of that today too?
Yeah.
It applies to Jews, it applies to Muslims.
Unfortunately, we do see that a lot today, and it's a problem.
Do we
it's a real problem.
want to comment on that a little bit? The suspicion that we're not fully American or fully
we don't
committed
have
to the
to really, unfortunately, we don't have to think
Say much.
hard or scratch our head to think about examples, because some of the finest Congress, people have been accused to or told to go back to where they come from or to go back to their countries.
I've been accused of dual allegiance just in the last week, unfortunately.
And from the president of our country. And that's, I say that sadly. And I think we need to take this as an alarming situation to our goal as a society to create safe, safe spaces, communities, localities, schools, places of worship for all people of different, as I said, colors and different cultures and backgrounds and sexualities, we really are facing a dilemma that needs our collective work to end it.
And was there a time when Muslim, Jewish, Christian, there's a kind of shared moral understanding? We had different holy days, we fasted on different days, we said our prayers in different languages, but there was a common moral understanding that we don't have anymore. Is that fair to say? Are there bigger differences than there were in the past?
Worldwide, those differences have probably existed for thousands of years. In America, it was probably more homogenous at one point than it is today. So maybe those are coming to the fore, exacerbated, and so on. But you know, a pluralistic society needs to really work hard at respect, love, avoid the tribalism, love your neighbor, and have space for disagreement without smacking each other so hard. And look, our kids, if you all have kids, I've got several kids and grandkids, and they disagree all the time. Our job is to teach them to disagree without hurting each other or destroying the relationship. And we can do that as a society, but it takes leadership from the faith community, it takes leadership from the media, it takes leadership from the White House and everywhere. So yeah, we really have a lot of work to do, but I would not despair. I would say let's keep doing programs like this, speak about it, and encourage people to love their neighbor, even if they disagree with their neighbor.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you another question, but I want you to think about how you might, what message you'd like to give to our audience as we wrap up here in 2 or 3 minutes. I heard from a colleague who belongs to another religious congregation that they were concerned about being singled out because of their beliefs, and so they were cautious in what they published on their website. They did not want the general public to be able to, and I think of this, that religion used to be a private matter. I would go to work, nobody knows where I worship or how I worship. But now if I'm applying for a job, somebody does a search, if I'm in the choir or I'm on the education committee or something, it's out there and people know who I am. Do anybody worry about publicizing names like that? Are you cautious? No? Okay.
No,
I mean,
we're not cautious about that, but unless the member is specifically asked.
Okay.
But they might ask for any number of reasons that have nothing to do with their job or their positions. You know, there's any number of reasons that people ask to be more anonymous than others. But for the whole, we're not overly protective of that at the temple.
Yeah,
Okay.
very similar at the Islamic Center. I mean, the times makes it necessary for us to be open, to be clear about our message, our beliefs. Even our center is open to people, visitors who want to come and listen to what we say, what we believe, what our sermons are like, what our worship is like. So I think we're past this point of secrecy.
Your question's a larger question of privacy, and we've lost a lot of our privacy in today's world. Just whether that's a good or a bad thing, that's a whole other discussion.
Okay, so you're gonna have to make this short, but I'd like each of you, if there's something you want our audience to take home from today's conversation, or someplace you'd like them to go to learn more, give them your recommendation.
Well, I would say that it's okay to have differences as long as we know how to express them and how to listen to the other.
Chuck, it's just done.
I think all Americans really need to be able to live and work according to their conscience without fear of unjust government punishment. That, to me, is the really big crisis we should avoid.
And Rabbi Todd?
I would think that we need to work hard to respect each other's differences and be able to dialogue about where we're really coming from, so that we can come to some compromise on where we want to see society go together, because we have to take it there together.
Well, I've enjoyed meeting these neighbors today, and in what I hope you also found to be an interesting and informative conversation. Thank you for being with us on Ethical Perspectives on the News, and we hope to see you next time. And good day.